January 22nd, 1943. Dawn broke over Guadalcanal like a wet blade, sharp, gray, and already humming with heat. Second Lieutenant John George lay belly down in a shallow depression west of Point Cruz, the coconut trees above him swaying like tall, tired sentinels. The jungle smelled of mud, cordite, and the faint, sour odor of bodies that hadn't been recovered. 14 Americans were dead, nearly all from one thing: snipers. Japanese sharpshooters had pinned down entire platoons for 72 hours. They fired from palm crowns, from hollow tree trunks, from knotholes carved in fallen logs. They fired once, then disappeared like ghosts. Every attempt to advance was answered with a single abrupt crack, and another Marine or soldier fell face first into the dirt. George breathed out slowly and adjusted the cheek weld on his rifle. Not an M1 Garand, not a Springfield. A Winchester Model 70 he'd ordered from a civilian catalog 2 years before the war. Dark walnut stock, blued steel, butter-smooth bolt. The rifle gleamed out of place in this world of mud and blood, like a gentleman who'd wandered into a knife fight. Every officer in the battalion had mocked it. Captain Morris, Lieutenant, this is a battlefield, not a deer camp. Lieutenant Briggs, you're going to get yourself killed with that toy. Even the armorer had laughed when George asked for 30-06 match-grade loads. George ignored them all, not because he believed he was smarter, but because he knew something they didn't, something only a lifetime of civilian competition shooting had taught him. Accuracy at distance isn't about firepower. It's about repeatability. His Lyman Alaskan optic fogged slightly as the humidity rose. He wiped it clean with the edge of his sleeve. The glass wasn't military issue, but he trusted it. He trusted all of it, the entire rifle. More than any weapon the Army had handed him. A shadow moved high in the coconut canopy. Not wind, not a bird. Something stiller, heavier. George exhaled. The jungle faded. The fear faded. The doubt faded. Only the reticle remained. And in that moment, long before the first shot of the day was fired, John George realized something. If the Army had a real chance of clearing Point Cruz, it wouldn't be with doctrine. It would be with this rifle, the one they told him to leave behind. George steadied his breathing, letting the crosshairs drift through the shifting lattice of palm leaves. Japanese snipers were disciplined. They hid their firing ports, concealed their bodies, and stayed perfectly still for hours. But even the best couldn't escape physics. Sunlight shifted. Shadows moved. Leaves fluttered unevenly. A faint reflection of skin, the outline of a cheekbone, or the subtle straight line of a rifle barrel would betray them. George saw it. A shape too geometrically neat to be nature. A small vertical sliver, about 3 inches wide, tucked between two fronds. To an untrained soldier, it looked like a piece of tree trunk. To George, it was practically a confession. He placed the crosshairs a fingertip left, allowing for the slight jungle breeze. No rush, no excitement. His pulse was slow as a metronome. Control the exhale. Break the trigger. The Model 70 barked, a sharp, clean crack that seemed quiet compared to the Garand's signature tone. The optic barely jumped. The recoil came straight back, smooth and predictable. A flutter of leaves erupted from the treetop, and something heavy fell through the branches, hitting the ground with a muted thud. He didn't smile. There were 3 more out there, maybe 4. To his left, Sergeant Holbrook whispered, "Holy hell was that?" "Sniper," George murmured. "He was waiting for us." Holbrook looked at the rifle again, like he was seeing it for the first time. "That thing's really going to do it, isn't it?" George didn't answer. He slid the bolt back, snick, and chambered another round. Another glimpse of movement trembled in the canopy 50 yards deeper. The Japanese were trained to rotate positions after a comrade fell, using the moment of American curiosity to take a second, deadlier shot. But George wasn't curious. He was already hunting. He shifted left, scanning. The Lyman optic wasn't magnified enough to make targets obvious, but that was fine. Overmagnification was the enemy in a humid jungle, where mirage warped the air like liquid glass. The Alaskan's clarity cut through the vapor just enough. A second silhouette eased forward in the leaves, tiny, barely perceptible. George squeezed gently. The rifle cracked again. Another body dropped. 2 shots. 2 kills. By now the platoon behind him was watching. Men who had spent 3 days pinned down by unseen rifles stared at George like he was performing witchcraft. Lieutenant Holbrook whispered, "If you keep this up, we might actually get off this damn ridge." George didn't reply. Instead, he rotated the bolt, the motion so smooth it made no sound. Somewhere in the trees, a third sniper was realizing the impossible. The Americans had found someone who could see them, and worse, someone who could outshoot them. The jungle had gone quiet in a way George didn't trust. 2 snipers down was enough to force the Japanese to change tactics. And unlike most American officers claimed, they weren't reckless. They were patient, calculating. Their best shooters preferred duels, psychological pressure, and angles so improbable most U.S. marksmen never spotted them. George kept his cheek pressed to the warm walnut stock, scanning the groves inch by inch. Holbrook lay beside him, straining to see anything at all. Minutes passed. Only insects spoke. Then, a flicker, low this time, near a rotten log half swallowed by vines. A faint, unnatural darkness in a knothole no wider than a silver dollar. George slowed his breathing. "That's your hide, isn't it? Clever." The Japanese sniper inside that log wasn't just well hidden. He was using a firing slit so small that even if George hit the log dead center, the round might not penetrate enough to injure him. It was a specialist trick, the kind only seasoned Manchurian veterans used. Most Americans would fire directly at the hole. George aimed at the left edge instead, 1 inch outward. "This shot's weird," he whispered. Holbrook blinked. "What are you?" George fired. The bullet struck not inside the hole, but the edge of the bark, splintering inward like a burst of needles. A sharp cry echoed inside the hollow. The log jerked slightly. Then the sniper toppled sideways, out of the opening, blood streaking the vines. Holbrook stared. "How the hell did you—" George worked the bolt again. "Sniper hides become traps," he said softly. "If the opening is too small to guarantee a hit, you hit what he's leaning against." He didn't have time to explain more, because the 4th sniper had been watching. A muzzle flash blinked high in a distant tree. Nearly a quarter second before the supersonic round sliced the air beside George's ear like ripping canvas. Bark exploded from a stump behind him. Men ducked. Someone swore. George didn't flinch. He'd been waiting for this one. The 4th sniper had fired the instant his comrade fell, meaning he had broken concealment in anger or panic. A mistake. Veteran snipers didn't panic. This one wasn't the best of the group, probably the youngest. George swung the Model 70 upward, tracking the ghostly muzzle flash residue. The Japanese sniper fired again, too fast, too emotional. George gently squeezed the trigger. Crack! A body plunged from the branches, arms limp, rifle tumbling separately. For down. Holbrook exhaled shakily. "Lieutenant, I think you just cleared the whole damn grove." George didn't take his eye from the optic. "No," he murmured. "There's one more, and he hasn't fired once." The real duelist, the one directing the others, was still out there. And he knew George's position now. The cafeteria lights dimmed slightly as the station rotated into its scheduled shadow phase. A cooler tone seeped through the windows, turning metal tables into quiet pools of blue. Most of the lunch crowd had dispersed by now, though not because of the shadow phase. They had left because the cubs had not moved from the humans' table. Mira sat cross-legged on the bench, elbows resting on the table, completely at ease. The 2 Corthan cubs were sprawled in front of her, their tails swishing in slow, curious arcs. The smallest one had placed both forepaws on her forearm, as if anchoring himself there, while the older cub kept sniffing her hair with rapid, feather-light bursts. Across the room, adults peeked from behind bulkhead partitions. Corthans weren't known for subtlety. Their horns tended to scrape against metal when they leaned too far, giving away their positions with tiny ping, tick noises. Mira pretended not to notice, mostly out of kindness. "Still hungry?" she asked softly. The littlest cub chirped, a sound between a purr and a whistle. Mira reached into the small tray beside her. She had set aside a few pieces of fruit earlier, not thinking she'd be offering them to anyone but herself. Now, she held out a slice to the cub. He didn't snatch it. He sniffed first, almost ceremonially, and then nibbled the edge with delicate precision. His sibling moved closer, eyeing Mira as though watching a dangerous but fascinating ritual. The older one's crest fluttered. Once, twice, signaling both caution and interest. "You didn't tell us humans had grooming rituals," came a low voice from behind a column. One of the Corthan adults finally stepped into view. Elder Vorsil, her armor paneling shimmering in the dim light. She had the bearing of someone who'd fought off-star eels in vacuum and lived a lecture about it. "This isn't grooming," Mira said with a small smile. "This is hanging out." "Hanging," Vorsil repeated, frowning at the idiom. "And out. Yet you remained seated." Mira chuckled. The cubs perked up, tilting their heads at the sound. Then the older cub made a move no one expected. He crawled forward, placed both claws on Myra's chest, and leaned his forehead, warm, heavy, unmistakably trusting, against her sternum. The room went silent again, this time with a different kind of fear, a deeper one, because head touching for Corthans wasn't affection. It was oath-making, and every adult in the cafeteria knew exactly what that meant. A metallic clatter rang out, someone dropping a tray in shock. The sound echoed through the cafeteria like an alarm no one dared to silence. Elder Vorsil stiffened instantly, crest flattening in disbelief. Several other adults stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the rigid caution of people witnessing a ritual that should not be happening. Mira blinked, completely unaware of the cultural landmine she was standing on, well, sitting under. The older cub kept his forehead pressed to her chest, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. His tiny claws were barely hooked into the fabric of her uniform, anchoring himself there as though she were something permanent. "Elder, is he okay?" Mira whispered. Vorsil's voice was hoarse. "Human, do not move." Her translator registered a deep harmonic fluctuation. Corthan speech for this is serious beyond measure. The younger cub froze beside his sibling, watching with unblinking golden eyes. Even he seemed to understand what was unfolding. "What's happening?" Mira asked, softer now. The elder inhaled sharply. "He has offered the forehead of bonding." Mira frowned. "Is that like a hug?" Half the cafeteria gasped. "Hug, hug," Vorsil repeated, as though Mira had suggested the cub had just pledged himself to a sandwich. "Human, an oath forehead is given only to brood siblings or future life-bonded companions." Myra's blood ran cold. "You wait, what?" No, he's a kid." "He is nearly 7 cycles," Vorsil said, as if that explained anything. "Old enough to understand the ritual, old enough to offer it intentionally." The cub nudged deeper into Myra's chest with a tiny rumble of contentment. "Oh, stars," she whispered. "Little guy, I didn't agree to anything. It's not." "You accepted," Vorsil said gravely. "You did not pull away." "I didn't know," Mira insisted. "Humans don't have forehead, pledge, rituals." The elder let out a long, scraping exhale. Several adults exchanged glances. A few murmured reverently, others anxiously. Finally, Vorsil lifted a clawed hand and gestured. "Cubs, release the human." The younger cub obeyed immediately. The older cub didn't. He let out a soft, determined growl. Tiny but powerful, the vocalization of a creature making a decision larger than itself. Then he spoke a single Corthan word Mira didn't understand, but every adult did. A claiming word, a choosing word. A word whispered only once in a lifetime, and directed at her. The sound that left the cub's throat was barely more than a breath, yet it felt as if someone had struck a gong inside the cafeteria. Every Corthan adult went motionless, absolutely, utterly still. Even the ventilation hum seemed to fade, as though the ship itself were straining to hear. Mira looked around, bewildered. What did he just say? Elder Vorsil placed a trembling hand over his chest. His voice dropped to a tone Mira had never heard from him before, a mix of reverence and dread. He called you Shark Eye. Okay, Mira said slowly. What is that? The elder cut her off instantly. Human. Listen carefully. That word is spoken once. Only once. By someone who has chosen a protector for life. Mira blinked. Protector? A sacred bond, WWII continued. The kind formed in wartime or during the loss of one's brood. In your human terms, perhaps closest to blood guardian. One who is to be followed, defended, trusted without boundary. Mira froze. He chose me, but I didn't do anything. I just kept him from falling. You touched him, WWII said quietly. With calmness. With open hands. That is how a Corthan mother greets her brood after danger. That is how a sibling accepts a frightened youth. To him, you answered. Mira stared at the cub, still clinging to her. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and steady. Completely relaxed. Completely trusting. I'm not even the same species, she whispered. How am I supposed to be anyone's anything? The elder stepped closer, lowering his head respectfully. It does not matter. For him, the choice is already made. To break it now would scar him for life. Mira swallowed hard. What happens if I accept? WWII exhaled. Then he belongs to your protection until he reaches maturity. He will defer to you. Seek your guidance. Learn your mannerisms. Treat your words as law. And you, human, would be expected to guard him with your life. Mira felt her heartbeat climbing into her throat. And if I don't accept? She asked. The elder hesitated. His crest twitched, a sign of pain. He will be shattered. A Shark Eye bond refused is like tearing a hatchling from its brood. He will survive, but only after years of sorrow. The little cub finally lifted his head. His eyes, bright gold and impossibly hopeful, met hers with a soft chirr. He had no idea she was confused. No idea she was overwhelmed. No idea she didn't understand the weight of what he'd done. To him, Mira was already his guardian. And then, in a trembling voice, he whispered the Corthan child's vow. Shark Eye, stay. Myra's breath caught. The cub's tiny claws tightened around the fabric of her sleeve. Not sharp, just insistent. Hopeful. His eyes were wide, glimmering in a way that made her chest feel unsteady. He repeated the word again, softer this time. Shark Eye, stay. Every Corthan adult watched in silence. Their posture low, their eyes averted in respect. This was not a moment for interruption. This was not a moment any outsider should ever witness. And yet here it was, resting in the hands of a human maintenance technician from Earth. Mira slowly knelt, so she was at the cub's height. He leaned forward immediately, forehead brushing hers in the Corthan gesture of trust. She felt his breath tremble against her cheek. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know your customs. I don't know your language. And I'm just a person who fixes coolant regulators. The cub blinked. His crest fluttered faintly, waiting. Mira swallowed thickly. But I won't leave you. A sound rippled through the room. An exhale, a collective release of tension so palpable that even Mira felt the shift in the air. The cub chirred with such relief it nearly broke her. He pressed his forehead to her chest, tiny shoulders shaking. Elder WWII lowered himself to one knee, something Mira had never seen him do, not even before senior officers. It is done, he murmured. The bond is accepted. Mira felt the weight settle on her shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was more like a mantle, warm, frightening, and strangely right. The cub lifted his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand before offering Mira the formal greeting of a newly bonded youth. A small, trembling palm placed over her heart. Mira mirrored it without thinking. The cafeteria erupted, not in cheers, but in a soft chorus of harmonic tones, the Corthan ritual of acknowledgement. It vibrated through the metal floors, through her bones, through something deeper she couldn't name. WWII stepped closer. There will be challenges, he said quietly. Lessons to learn. Expectations to navigate. But know this, human, you did not choose him. Mira looked down at the cub clinging to her. He chose you. He buried his face into her shirt again, and Mira wrapped an arm around him almost instinctively. Well, she said faintly, trying and failing to steady her voice. "I guess we're family now." The cub made a soft, contented trill. And for the first time in the long, metal monotony of deep space duty, Mira felt something new take root inside her. Something fierce, something protective, something she hadn't expected to feel for anyone out here among the stars. A beginning. For a heartbeat, the cafeteria fell hollowed out. The cub's claws clung to Myra's sleeve, as though letting go meant falling into a void no one else could see. His voice, soft, cracked, barely formed, repeated the word that had stopped every Corthan in the room. "Sharkai, stay." It wasn't just a plea. Every Corthan adult watching knew exactly what the cub had invoked. A bond request, a declaration usually made only after a trial or a shared ordeal or the near loss of life. It was sacred enough that even ranking officers lowered their heads in respect, and the cub had offered it to a human mechanic in a grease-stained jumpsuit. Mira felt the weight of dozens of gazes, but none were judgmental. They were waiting, measuring, silent in a way that made her pulse pound. She crouched slowly until she was level with him. The cub took the opportunity instantly, pressing his forehead to hers in a trembling attempt at the Corthan trust greeting. His scales were warm. His breath was shaky. He smelled faintly of ozone and fruit rations. "I don't even know your customs," she whispered. Another chirr from the cub, fragile, hopeful. I didn't want you to be scared." He clutched her sleeve harder. "I'm not supposed to," she tried, but the words crumbled before leaving her mouth. Across the room, Elder Vorsil, who had witnessed battles that Mira only knew from orientation files, bowed his head to her, not in deference, in recognition. "Mira of Earth," he said solemnly, "the cub has placed his spirit thread in your hands." Her throat tightened. The cub lifted his face, eyes shimmering with a trust that felt far too big for someone so small. He placed a tiny hand against her chest, right over her heart. A gesture that meant, "Here, this is where I wish to belong." Something inside Mira folded and unfurled. She mirrored the gesture with a shaking hand. "I won't leave you," she whispered. "I promise." The cub let out a sound, half sob, half chirr, that made even the stern ship's security officer wipe his eyes discreetly. A low harmonic hum filled the cafeteria as every Corthan present acknowledged the bond. It was soft, resonant, ancient. It vibrated in the walls, in the deck plating under Myra's boots, in a quiet place deep inside her where fear and instinct were slowly making room for something else. Something that felt terrifyingly like love. And just like that, a single sentence from a frightened cub shifted the course of Myra's life aboard the Tasrin forever. Word of the moment in the cafeteria spread through the Tasrin faster than coolant through a ruptured conduit. By the time Myra walked the cub, still clinging to her jumpsuit pocket like a barnacle, to the med deck, half the crew pretended not to stare. The other half didn't bother pretending. Bonding outside one's species wasn't forbidden. It was simply unprecedented. Corthan bonds had specific layers: emotional, instinctive, cultural. Humans, as far as the xenobiology officers claimed, lacked the neural frequencies required to reciprocate. That didn't stop the cub from practically radiating contentment every time Myra's hand brushed his. The medtech on duty blinked twice before managing a greeting. "Human Mira, you've acquired a dependent?" The cub hissed softly, pressing himself closer to Myra's leg. "Not acquired," Mira said defensively. "He was terrified, and he chose you," the medtech murmured, scanning them both with a trembling claw. "Fascinating, potentially catastrophic, but fascinating." The cub nuzzled Myra's hip. She felt her heart melt into a warm, helpless puddle. The medtech handed the cub a nutrient sphere, and his joy flared so brightly Mira could almost feel it against her skin like sun-warm light. The medtech froze. "He's sinking to your emotional field." "What does that mean?" Mira asked. "It means," the medtech said, pupils dilating in disbelief, "he has accepted you as his primary safety anchor, his chosen protector." Mira swallowed. "I'm just an engine tech." To him, the medtech said gently, You are the gravity that keeps his world from spinning apart. The cub looked up and reached for her hand. Tiny claws curled inward so he wouldn't scratch her. Mira took it, and he relaxed instantly. The medtech's frills lifted in awe. He regulates through you, even calm cycles. You're easing his autonomic spikes. Mira blinked, meaning he cannot sleep without you nearby. The medtech translated. He will panic if separated too long. You are now essential. Essential. Mira whispered. Like a parent? Closer. More like. The medtech hesitated. A soul compass. Myra's breath caught. Before she could process it, the cub stepped in front of her and spread his tiny arms as if shielding her from the whole universe. When Mira scooped him up, he tucked his head under her chin, gave a soft, satisfied trill, and fell asleep instantly. The medtech exhaled shakily. That, they said, should not be possible. Mira held the sleeping cub against her chest, feeling his heartbeat sink to hers. Yeah, she whispered. I get that a lot. She didn't know it yet, but this impossible bond would reshape the entire ship and put Mira in the center of a crisis the Tassarin had never prepared for. The ship's command staff assembled barely an hour after the med deck report, and Mira found herself standing awkwardly in the observation ring with a sleeping alien cub wrapped around her like a living scarf. His tail had curled instinctively around her arm. Every time she tried to shift him, he made a distressed chirp and burrowed closer. Not helpful, especially not when 5 senior officers were staring at her like she'd accidentally brought a live antimatter core into a diplomatic ballroom. Captain Ryvac, a towering Corthan with rust-gold scales and the ability to silence a room simply by breathing, clicked his mandibles. So, he rumbled, the human has imprinted a royal line cub. Mira almost dropped him. What? The cub stirred, grumbled, then resettled against her collarbone. The captain continued, unbothered. This child carries a high-purity ancestral lineage. His instincts should bind only to trained Corthan guardians. Instead, he gestured at Mira with a massive claw. He has chosen you. The room buzzed with uneasy energy. Officers exchanged rapid, worried throat clicks. Someone muttered about political fallout. Another whispered something that sounded like border treaty collapse. Mira raised her free hand. Okay, pause. I fix engines. I don't cause interstellar incidents. The ship's psychologist turned, eyes wide. You may have already done so. Mira squeezed her eyes shut. Can someone explain in non-galactic disaster terms? Lieutenant Irva cleared her throat. Royal Line cubs are strategically important. Their bloodlines stabilize clan councils. Losing one, especially to an unregistered emotional imprint, could be interpreted as a hostile act. Hostile. Mira looked down at the tiny sleeping alien drooling slightly into her uniform. He's literally snoring on me. That is part of the problem, Irva whispered. The captain stepped closer, studying the cub pressed to Mira like she was an oxygen tank in a vacuum. Separate them. Mira reluctantly tried easing the cub off her chest. The cub woke instantly, eyes wide, fangs bared, tail flaring. A sound tore out his throat, raw and high-pitched. Every Corthan officer froze. A few flinched. That, Irva whispered in horror, was a distressed scream. Before anyone could intervene, the cub launched himself back into Myra's arms, gripping her with desperate strength, trembling uncontrollably until she instinctively rubbed the back of his neck. He calmed. Instantly, the entire room stared, stunned. Captain Ryvac slowly exhaled. Impossible or not, this bond is absolute. Mira swallowed. So what does that mean for him? The captain's eyes hardened. For him, it means safety. Then, after a beat, for you, it means responsibility. And finally, with quiet gravity, for all of us, it means whatever happens next will reshape our entire diplomatic future. The cub cuddled deeper into Myra's arms, trusting her completely, and Mira realized, terrified and overwhelmed, that she was now the protector of a child whose existence could alter the fate of 2 species. The next morning, the ship hummed with a tension no one could openly acknowledge. Mira moved carefully through the corridors, the cub still curled in a sling against her chest. He had woken briefly, yawned a series of high-pitched chirps, then returned to sleep, secure in the gravitational rhythm of her heartbeat. She had learned fast. Any sudden movement, loud noise, or unfamiliar person could trigger panic. Once, a crew engineer had accidentally tapped her shoulder while she adjusted the environmental controls. The cub shrieked, claws extended, tail thrashing, and for a long moment, Mira feared he'd fling himself entirely off her. She had held him tight, whispering soft, soothing tones she didn't even know she could make. By the time the engineer backed away, the cub had relaxed again, nuzzling into her neck as if nothing had happened. It was exhausting, and yet, every officer who watched her realized something important. The cub's survival depended entirely on her. One wrong move could have catastrophic emotional consequences, not just for the cub, but potentially for the broader Corthan command structure. They were, in effect, raising a highly influential royal child in the hands of a human with no formal training. By mid-cycle, the ship's AI had begun adapting. Sensors that had previously logged environmental hazards now tracked the cub's vitals and proximity to Mira, issuing gentle alerts when he became restless. Mira had joked half-heartedly that she was now part of the monitoring system. She wasn't joking when she realized the entire crew had tacitly agreed. The cub's welfare was now part of the ship's operational protocols. The cub, meanwhile, had begun small displays of trust. He allowed her to hold him while she fixed machinery, lightly draped over her arm like a scarf. He chirped contentedly while she read system logs, and when she hummed softly, he hummed back in a way that resonated through the sling. Every vibration, every pulse of warmth seemed to cement the unspoken bond between them. By the end of the day, Mira understood a simple truth. This cub had taught her more about patience, awareness, and instinctive communication than any protocol or manual could. Every gesture mattered. Every sigh, blink, or twitch was a message. And every single human on the Tasrin was now aware that the safety of a high-value Corthan heir rested entirely on the judgment, skill, and care of a mechanic who had once only fixed coolant leaks. It was terrifying and exhilarating, because for the first time, Mira realized that trust, true trust, was a weapon as sharp as any phaser, as effective as any protocol, and far more fragile than anyone imagined. The bond between Mira and the cub began to draw attention beyond the med deck and observation ring. By now, word had reached the junior officers and several specialists. A human had somehow earned the unwavering trust of a royal line Corthan cub. In a species where hierarchy and ancestry determined loyalty, that was unprecedented. Lieutenant Irva approached Mira that cycle with caution, his scales tinged with nervous teal. "Human," he said quietly, "we've run simulations. If the cub remains dependent on a single non-Corthan, it will alter both training schedules and interspecies diplomatic protocols." Mira frowned. "I'm just taking care of him. I'm not teaching him strategy or politics." Irva shook his head. "Even care is strategy when it comes to them. You are already teaching him by example. Trust, patience, risk assessment. That's more than most Corthan Guardians accomplish in a standard decade-long apprenticeship." Mira blinked, realizing he was right. She had been improvising instinctively, responding to his needs, reading his body language, mediating small conflicts when other crew members inadvertently frightened him. Every decision she made, every movement she chose, became an unspoken lesson. The cub chirped softly from his sling, tail flicking. Mira followed his gaze to a maintenance hatch across the corridor. A sudden clanging sound had startled him, and instinctively, he braced against her chest. "See," she murmured to Irva. "I'm just holding him. That's all." Irva exhaled slowly. "Not just holding. You are shaping his perception of safety and leadership. He will remember how you reacted here, the first real test of your bond. If you fail, he will falter in future crises." Myra's chest tightened. The weight of responsibility pressed down harder than any engine panel she had ever lifted. She had not volunteered to shape a royal heir's development. She had not signed up to influence interstellar diplomacy through a bond with a cub. And yet, here she was. The day continued with routine work, but every step, every tool she picked up, every instruction she gave the cub became purposeful. She spoke gently, modeled calm reactions to alarms, encouraged curiosity without allowing risk. By the end of the shift, the cub mirrored her posture, his confidence rising. Crew members quietly observed, realizing that the bond had a stabilizing effect not only on him, but on everyone in proximity. By nightfall, Mira understood an undeniable truth. This bond had made her a leader, whether she wanted the title or not. And she was only beginning to grasp the consequences. 2 cycles later, the Tasrin entered a low-gravity sector near a nebular drift. Minor system vibrations suddenly escalated into a full-scale mechanical tremor. Consoles beeped in panic tones as warning lights flashed. Crew members braced, but the cub, now fully awake, clutched Myra's chest with frantic claws, his tail thrashing in high anxiety. Mira froze for a heartbeat, feeling the weight of responsibility sink deeper. Every human crew member was trained for emergencies, but no training manual addressed what to do when a highly intelligent, emotionally reactive alien child clings to you while a ship trembles. The cub shrieked, a short, piercing sound, and Mira felt a jolt of pure instinct. She ducked low, pulling him tight, positioning herself between him and any potential falling debris. Every instinct she had developed over the past cycles screamed at her, protect him at all costs. Nearby officers began giving orders, but Mira blocked them, shaking her head. I can't let him get jostled. I have to stabilize him first. The cub's eyes met hers, wide with fear. She could feel his rapid heartbeats, his shallow breathing. And then, almost without conscious thought, she began adjusting her stance in micro steps, synchronizing with his body, letting him feel the security of a steady, unshakable anchor. As the tremor subsided, the crew realized something extraordinary. Not only had Mira prevented the cub from panicking, but her calmness had radiated outward. Minor panic among nearby crew members diminished. Consoles stopped flashing irrelevant alerts. Even the AI sensors registered a subtle stabilization in the habitat's microgravity environment, as if the cub's emotional state was, in some way, linked to ship-wide operational efficiency. Elder Vorsil appeared quietly at the doorway, eyes narrowing in respect. Human, your ability to maintain him. It exceeds anything we could train or predict. You have become the fulcrum of his world. Mira exhaled shakily. I'm just keeping him calm. No, Vorsil said softly. You're teaching him survival, leadership, trust, and through that, you influence all of us. The cub nestled deeper against Myra's chest, tail curling around her arm, eyes half closed. For the first time, Mira understood the magnitude of her bond. She was no longer merely caretaker. She was anchor, teacher, protector, and, if necessary, the guiding force for a being whose very existence carried political and cultural weight across star systems. And the ship, the crew, had already begun relying on her in ways that no one would have imagined when she first picked up a wrench. Her heartbeat slowed, syncing with the cub's. One truth crystallized in her mind. The challenges ahead would be unlike anything she had ever faced. But for the first time, she also realized she could meet them by the time the Tasrin entered the next orbit. Mira had accepted what the rest of the crew already whispered but didn't dare say aloud. Her life, her decisions, and her very presence had become inseparably linked to the cub. Every crew member adjusted their behavior, consciously or unconsciously, around the pair. Systems were calibrated to minimize stressors near Mira. Personnel schedules were shifted to avoid accidental triggers. Even the AI subtly adjusted environmental parameters to maintain the cub's comfort. Mira walked through the corridors with him nestled in a sling, the cub's tiny claws gently clutching her uniform, tail wrapped securely around her arm. Crew members bowed, slightly as they passed. Not in fear, not in ceremony, but in acknowledgement. They had witnessed something rare. A human not only surviving among Corthans, but shaping the emotional stability of a royal line heir. The cub, now fully awake, chirped and turned his golden eyes toward her. He made a soft trill, a sound Mira had come to understand as trust reinforced. She responded with a gentle hum, the vibrations harmonizing with his own. For a moment, the ship itself seemed to pause, the low hum of engines, the flicker of lights, all fading into the background. Elder Vorsil approached, his massive form almost silent. "Human Mira," he said, voice resonant with both awe and caution, "you have not only preserved the cub, but taught him instinctive resilience. This bond, impossible by all tradition, is now your responsibility. And make no mistake, what you do next will affect interstellar relations for cycles to come." Mira swallowed, the enormity of it weighing on her chest almost as heavily as the cub's body. She adjusted him gently. I'll protect him. I don't know how far that goes, but I'll do it." Vorsil inclined his head. "Then prepare, because in the cycles ahead, your choices, your calm, and your guidance will not only define him, they may define the fate of two civilizations." The cub chirped again, nuzzling against her, completely unaware of the cosmic stakes surrounding their tiny, improbable partnership. And Mira felt something in that moment she had never anticipated, not fear, but determination. The impossible bond had been formed. And together, human and cub would navigate dangers, diplomacy, and discovery, forever changing the understanding of trust, loyalty, and the unspoken power of choice. For Mira, the wrench she carried in her belt had transformed into something far greater, a symbol of responsibility, courage, and a bond that could shape the stars. The cub shifted slightly, golden eyes glimmering, and Mira whispered softly, "We'll face it together." And for the first time, the Tasrin's corridors felt like home.